Okay, so welcome everybody again. As I said, my name is Dr. Lisa Stephenson, and I am the director of the Storymakers Company at Leeds Beckett University. I'm a former primary school teacher myself. And a little bit about the Storymakers Company. The focus of our work is about using creative learning and creative pedagogy to amplify the voice of particularly of marginalized children, but we work a lot with teachers and artists educators in all sorts of different creative ways, thinking about ways that we can integrate creative pedagogy into curriculum really meaningfully. And today what I'm going to do is just offer you, as I've said, quite an in-depth exploration of one of our projects, our flagship projects called the Storymakers Press. So I'm going to run through some slides now and tell you a little bit about what we do and what we did on this particular case study with children in a primary school, in year 5 of a primary school, over a series of about 9 months. I'm going to share with you our thinking in doing that, our reflections in doing that, and then most importantly, the reflections of the children that we were working with, in the hope that, again, it might offer a rich space for thinking about what pedagogy of belonging actually means and how we might bring it into our classroom practices. So I start perhaps because of the, one of the key focus for this conference is around culturally responsive teaching. And I really like this definition in Gay. I know there's a lot of text. I am going to read it because I hope that it frames the project that I'm going to share with you, and perhaps invite you to look as we speak, as I kind of share the project, to look for and see if you can identify aspects of the pedagogy that you think relate to this definition of culturally responsive teaching. So it connects students' cultural knowledge, their prior experiences, and their performance styles to academic knowledge and intellectual tools in ways that legitimize what students already know. By embracing the social, cultural realities and histories of students through what is taught and how, culturally responsive teachers negotiate classroom cultures with their students that reflect the communities where students develop and grow. This is no small matter because it requires that teachers transcend their own cultural biases and preferences to establish and develop patterns for learning and communicating that engage and sustain student participation and achievement. It's a pretty kind of, dense articulation, I think, reflects the complexity of working in this way, and wanted to pick out a few things from that quote, particularly the idea of legitimizing what students already know. And our focus in this presentation is the use of story. And the rationale for that is that stories allow a space for children to bring their own cultural funds of knowledge into the classroom. They also offer us a space to transcend our own lived experiences, don't they, as kind of as educators, and to think outside that. And Bell Hooks talked very much about that. So the vehicle for this pedagogy is story, and it's only one way of teaching in a culturally responsive way, but it's an area that we are particularly specialized in researching and practicing in the Storymakers Company. So I think that idea of linking learning to young people's lived experiences and valuing that, that being an opportunity for us to then to reflect on our own positionalities as teachers and educators. And then I think also the idea of participation, achievement and communication, and how young people perceive that. I want to pick up on those 3 areas. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Storymakers Press in a minute. Just a couple of facts and figures there. We've got there from a kind of a fairly recent census. One of the key issues around culturally relevant pedagogy is that as we can see, only 13.1% of teachers are from, this report says, Black minority ethnic backgrounds. I'm going to use the term Black and global majority backgrounds in our schools. And that certainly is not representative of the 33.5% of pupils who are from Black and global majority background. So there's a real issue, as we know, of representation, and that's probably where our project starts in terms of the Storymakers Press. So a little bit about the Storymakers Press, what we do, and I'm going to talk today about our second of 4 books called Zalfa Amir is a Warrior, is we co-create stories with children. Now, my own area of specialism is drama pedagogy, story making pedagogy. And by that, I mean using drama and creative writing as a way to open up spaces for culturally relevant learning. So that's my area of specialism. And there's a number of people who are introduced in a minute who are part of the team, but essentially over a series of 5 workshops, we create stories with groups of children. At every part of that creation, the children lead the development in terms of the creation of the characters, the backstory, the setting, everything they make within those drama workshops that we run over 5 or 6 sessions, or actually up to 8 sessions sometimes, is pulled into the synopsis of the story. And between those sessions as a team, we meet and we reflect on what's happened in the workshops, and then we try to integrate that into the developing storyline. The children also are part of the publishing process as well, so they they will kind of comment on the development of the story right up until publication, and they're named within the story as well. So that's the front cover. And again, just to mention why were we working in this way? We're working in this way, again, not only because of those concerns about lack of representation in terms of teaching and teachers, but also in terms of the lack of Black and global majority protagonists in children's literature. I'm sure you'll be aware that this was highlighted by the reports from CLPE, the Centre for Primary Education, and they highlighted in their report in 2017 that only 4% of children's stories had a character in it from a Black and global majority background. Again, this just isn't initially. Actually, it was 1% of those as a main character, as a protagonist. This is since has risen since the first report to 4% and then to 7% in subsequent reports. Sorry, that's my dog. But there is still issues around authenticity of the representations, and I'm going to talk about that. So the idea that many of the characters are homogenized, so perhaps they don't have sort of authentic, they're not authentically representing groups of young people within those, within that Black and global majority group. Additionally, stories are often made and written for children by adults. And again, we see this as kind of problematic in terms of reflecting children's reality. So again, I've talked about the book I'm going to focus on. It was co-created with 18 girls ages 10 and 11 years old from second generation Pakistani heritage in a Bradford school. And this kind of partnership was established based on prior work that we had done with the school. And the school were interested on a focus on improving confidence in the girls' expression and low expectations from families. And that's quotes from the school. So I want to mention the team kind of quickly here before I go on to talk about what the girls did in those workshops. I'm going to rush through this, a little bit of this. So you've got at the top of the picture there myself. Again, I've mentioned my area in terms of drama pedagogy. Tom in the middle there, Dr. Tom Dobson, who has a a specialism in creative writing, particularly writing with children. And then we've got Anna Sanchez as well, who is on this call as well, who's our children's publisher. And you'll see that kind of, generally by looking at that picture and looking at the girls, we are a group of people who are racialized as white. So it was really, really key in this project, when we were working with the girls that we were working with, that we had Jay, who you can see on the right-hand side of your screen, Jay Ali, who is who was a student in creative writing on one of our courses at Leeds Beckett University. And she was absolutely key in shaping the writing and being a kind of really valued member of our team as well. So Jay became the writer on this project. She was mentored by Tom and she attended the workshops. And in terms of those critical reflections, it was absolutely critical that we had her voice. So again, what I wanted to talk about is the idea of belonging in relation to this project. There's a real lack of research on how the creative processes can create a sense of belonging. Belonging is viewed as a relational process. And specifically within this project, we were interested in terms of critical race theory, the idea of empowerment through authentic voice, okay, and naming your reality, which are seen as kind of two really key parts of culturally responsive pedagogy, and Ladson Bellings talks about that. So what does that look like, empowerment through authentic voice? How can creative spaces offer an opportunity for naming your own reality? And this is what we were interested in researching. Furthermore, just a little bit more on the rationale for that as well. We've mentioned that it's very problematic that public and political rhetoric tends to speak of race as heterogeneous. We've talked about that. And then we've mentioned, that CLP had these reports that particularly also in terms of homogenizing characters, talked about the importance of characters within stories having agency and then being relatable to the everyday lives of the children who were reading the stories, and the idea of homogenized illustration was key. It was a key issue. And again, the idea that actually looking at the types of agency that a character has in a story is one way to look at challenging racial stereotypes. So I'm going to just move on now a little bit to the project outline because of time. So the project, as I've mentioned, ran over 3 months. We had 8 workshops. One of the things we were interested in was thinking about our own positionality and our positions, I guess, of power, and how we were holding the spaces for the girls to speak their truth, as we've said before, and name their own reality. We did kind of do lots of interviewing of the girls, of the male class teachers. The girls kept creative journals, and this presentation is based on their perceptions that were gathered throughout that process. And then we interviewed them at the start and at the end of the project. I'll mention a little bit about drama. Again, I call it drama world building in these workshops. Key to that is that within the workshops, because drama can be thought of in terms of performance, so this is about pedagogy, and this is kind of the area of my research. Aspects, features of the work is that it works in ways to encourage multiple perspectives and viewpoints. It alters the relationship between the adult and the child, because when we were going into the schools, we were not there as teachers, we were there as artist educators and working with and alongside the girls, so writing alongside them in children into emotion. Key to this is that also in terms of language and linguistics, the girls were using multimodal different ways of working. And by that, I mean, it wasn't just spoken or written. They were using their bodies to shape the storyline, and they were using visual, they were drawing, and they were using artifacts. And this is really important for some of the girls who were special educational needs and new to English. And again, there's always a duality between the fictional world and the real world, and that's the kind of core of our work. I want to mention here as well that, again, as the artists, this wasn't about kind of asking, and again, a warning with this work. It wasn't about expecting people to share trauma, particularly around, you know, yeah, within their own lived experiences. It was really important that we were constantly reflecting on ourselves, our positionality, and doing the work around anti-racist practices, and Jay was key in supporting us. Well, it was key in those conversations. I'd like to mention, before I go on to say what the girls did, which is probably the most important and exciting part of the presentation, that initially when we started working with the girls, they were only, the school only put forward 11 girls for this project, and those girls were girls who were seen as competent writers, and there were a number of girls, 7 other girls, who were excluded from the project because they were seen as low-level writers, or they had special educational needs. Because of the way that the pedagogy works in terms of the storying and the making story and the using drama, it was really key to us that everybody, all the girls in those classes were involved. So that's why there were 18 workshops. So the workshops were loosely based on the story of the Inauspicious Bride, and we'll come to that in a minute. And that was a story that was recommended to us by a professor at the university. And it was very loosely based. So this is a story, it's a traditional Kashmiri fairy tale. I'm going to invite, I've got a little video of Jay talking about it in a minute, but essentially what's important about that story is that the female character is voiceless in it, and she's very much seen as a victim of the circumstances. Now, we didn't explicitly use that story. We took 3 key moments from it, and we didn't actually read the girls the whole story at all, and actually they didn't identify with that story. So it was used loosely, but the girls essentially were restorying that story and giving it a contemporary narrative. So the 3 themes that came out of our research looking at the workshop, and I'm going to take you through them because I think essentially they offer a progression of ways that we worked, and certainly holding those spaces for the girls consistently and working with them so that they felt that they could say, they could reflect their experiences, and they could say what they thought rather than perhaps what they thought we wanted to hear. So the first theme is testing voices. And I think that when we first started the workshops, we did a lot of games to encourage kind of free expression. And these weren't just verbal, they were physical. You can see in the corner there, the girls are creating a statue of a particular feeling. I can't remember what it was actually at the time. You know, it could have been something like ashamed. I don't know. You can see a picture that they often chose the words. We didn't just choose negative feelings, but it was this idea of physical expression. We often asked the girls at the beginning of a session how they felt. So what color did they feel? And if we'd had more time, I would have asked you what color you feel today. What we noted, and the idea for that is that we were moving into the realm of emotions and talking about emotions, but within a fictional story. And initially the girls tended to repeat what each other had said. So they either all felt yellow or they all felt you know, vivid orange. But as the workshops went on, they started to give different opinions. So there was a range of colors appearing at the beginning of the workshop, which is really interesting. And actually, when we reflected at the end of the project, some of the girls used those colors to explain how they felt about the project. So there's a nice quote here. You chose yellow that day, I can remember. I chose it because we had the opportunity that was only girls, and girls that we knew as well, and we were really close. So again, you know, this is kind of really kind of an interesting start to the project, because we had to work really hard to encourage expressions that were different amongst the girls. The teachers' perceptions here, I have to say, and it isn't a criticism, but an observation, the teachers' perceptions were often of the girls that were perhaps, the narrative there was one that was sort of more of a negative narrative. So there was a lower, in terms of the perceptions of the project and why they'd chosen the girls, there was a lower expectation from families for the girls versus the boys. The girls' experiences are not as broad as the other students. I want to just focus on this comment from a teacher. There's often a lack of willingness to come forward and persevere in class. And I want to focus on the idea of willingness in this session. This was linked to cultural factors, socioeconomic deprivation. It's worth saying that the school was in an area of socioeconomic deprivation in Bradford, eager to cover up when they didn't understand, don't like getting it wrong, and lack of confidence. I asked them how they then kind of supported that, the growing of that confidence, and the answer was metacognitive and behavioral techniques. So I think it's interesting that story making is kind of, for us, was a different approach to that. And again, not a criticism of the teachers, but it is a deficit, kind of quite a deficit perception of the girls. Okay, so I want to go on to the second theme, which is storying new landscapes. And what happened as we went along is the girls became more comfortable in those spaces. And I think for us, we felt that we'd earned their trust. I say we joined in, and Jay was part of that as well. I'm going to talk about the setting. And the original story has a forest. The girls, again, began to restory these new landscapes in their own ways. And it was almost as if they were testing the limits of possibility in the fictional world. So the kind of things they put in their new setting was a book which traps evil creatures, a log coffin which traps people in it, and a shed which captures the spirit of young women. And this idea that their setting became a horror genre. That's what they wanted, the horror setting. You can see it there, pretty kind of, pretty grim space that they created, and they were really excited about. And I want to go back to this idea of willfulness. And Sarah Ahmed talks about willfulness as an electric current passing through us and switching us on. And it felt to us as a group as if the girls had become switched on, and now they were pushing the limits of possibility in what they perceived as brave spaces. In terms of the characters, we took 3 characters from the story: a man, an elder, and a girl. And again, we've mentioned that the girl was pretty voiceless in the story. And again, it's almost as if as we went through, they were recasting these characters willfully, pushing the limits of possibility, and in fact, even mocking the male character who appeared as this grotesque protagonist. So we've got the man with a cracked face, nasty, selfish, grey hair, soul killer, no blood inside, and facial hair. The elder's a myth, the hunter with witch fingers depressed because he's going through a rough time, possessed devil, mean, crazy, weirdo, old-fashioned facial hair. And the girl becomes confident, happy, independent, mindful, jealous, creative, envious, and possessed. So again, very interesting about the way the girls were beginning to kind of recast the characters willfully. You can see a picture there from the workshop, and here the girls are creating some of the events in the story, and one of them that they wanted to create was a wedding. And it's a bit of the workshop transcript there, where the girl, you can see us saying, tell us about the characters you created, and the girls talk about the 2 aunties that they created being fussy and bossy. They had, I was the bride's sister, and I tried to move everything on. The groom's family dropped the case twice, so the cake wasn't there, and then the bride, she was really bossy and really disturbing. So there's lots of comedy moments that the girls bring in again, and again this kind of recasting of the story becomes a really kind of vibrant story full of comedy and horror and cultural references that they started to bring into the space. And Jay was actually really key here, and in terms of the writing and writing in aspects, developing these scenes from the drama workshops into the story and bringing in kind of cultural references and language. And the girls really reflected on that at the end of the project. Couple of quotes here. Zalfa, she's a Muslim. The language in the book and the language that we use, it meant a lot because we know the names and we're like, oh my God, we know what's happening and we know what they're talking about. And it's really nice to see. This morning, our teacher, she didn't understand what some of the words meant. And it was really nice telling her what it was about. I recognize our Punjabi words. And I think this quote's really key in terms of belonging. It makes me feel like I'm part of something. So this idea of representation started to come through from the girls' own admission, that the storying and that the use of creative storying methods seemed to be reflecting their realities. I'd like to play a little clip from Jay here, because one of the things that was really interesting was the reluctance of the girls to give the protagonist a traditional name, and Jay was really important here. I'm going to just, I think that it's not going to play. You can see I'm going to come back to that picture. I'm just going to escape. I'd really like to hear Jay's voice, and I'm just going to play Jay speaking from the PowerPoint here. Apologies about that. And if you can't hear me, if you can't hear this, Anna, could you unmute and just tell me? It should play.
Hello, my name is Joeri Ali, but I'm mostly known as Jay. I want to speak a little bit about a book I wrote in collaboration with the Storymakers Press and the girls of Girlington Primary School. Now that book is called Zalfa Emir is a Warrior, Powerful, Responsible and Definitely Not Little. It's a retelling of a Kashmiri folktale called The Inauspicious Bride. Now the Inauspicious Bride is this story that's quite voiceless and nameless, and by that I mean none of the characters had names. There was very little dialogue, and the protagonist herself, the bride, does not speak for the entire story. So I wanted to subvert that narrative. I wanted to give the protagonist a name to start with, and inject a strong personality into Zalfa Emir. Now the name Zalfa Emir took a while to get to, because I wanted to find something that was kind of distinctive, but at the same time something that would represent a South Asian female. The girls I worked with were putting forward names like Stephanie or Emily or Amy, which is fine, but they weren't putting forward their own names or names that sounded like theirs. And I don't blame them, because only 4% of children's books published last year in the UK had a BAME protagonist. Only 4%. Now that's a very disproportionate, underrepresented narrative. Growing up, I also was never exposed to BAME protagonists in stories. I never read stories about those of a Black or Asian background or anyone else from a minoritized ethnicity, and I think that did have a huge impact on my writing, because I didn't think that I could choose names that were similar to mine but not mine, and I didn't think I could write about someone from my own background. And that being said, I really wanted to write a story that I would have loved to have read when I was younger. So the girls of Girlington Primary School were also very vocal and creative and imaginative, and I really wanted to capture their energy and strong voices and humour in the story. That's why Zalfa Emir is this headstrong, witty, amusing character who is on a mission to save her parents. That's all I'm saying. And I really do hope children's books that will represent diverse characters. The Storymakers Press are doing a great job so far, and they're striding in the right direction.
Right, I'm just going to stop there and go back to the current slide. And you can see there, the girls, again, that idea of cultural, on the one hand, the girls being very proud of their own, and the importance of having their own language in the book, but then on the other hand, the reluctance within this story of these girls, again, just like Jay, to choose a traditional name for the protagonist. Okay, you can see here, one of the things that we did was, again, in terms of trying to address this idea of authenticity, is we work with an illustrator within our School of Education School of Art at the university, through Storymakers, and we took aspects that the girls had. You can see in the background a little picture there that comes from the girls drawing, you know, aspects that the girls had created in the workshops and bring them into the illustrations. And again, the girls fed back on this, and they shaped, you know, aspects of the visual work that went into the book as well. And you can see the two aunties here from that scene. Okay, two more themes quickly, and then to have some time to in discussion. I want to talk a bit about going beyond that story then, and the importance of story making and imaginative creative spaces as a place for developing a sense of belonging as well. Kind of what happens beyond that, and the idea of linking the imaginative world with the real world. At the end of the project, we did, again, as we said, talk a lot to the girls about how they felt about the project. And they really reflected on Zalfa and Mia as a character. Again, there's a quote here: she seems like so confident, some people, and she's like, I'm definitely not small. And people call her small, but she doesn't think she's it. She has lots of self-confidence, and other people who are reading the book can like not. When some people are calling them names, they can learn from the book because she's not taken down by some small comment. And I think this idea that Zalfa then became the embodiment of the character and the female character that they wanted to offer as a role model to other girls was really interesting to us, and something they were very proud of. So I think this idea of collective responsibility, the ability to respond and to be responded to, is something key in terms of belonging, and it incorporates all the other themes. So the girls went through a process of testing voices, testing the limits of possibility. The brave space was key to that, and us as artists, particularly the three of us who were racialized as white, really reflecting on our own perceptions in those spaces, and going away and reading and doing the work ourselves around those perceptions. This recasting of characters willfully, naming their own reality and embodying new narratives for things that happened as we went through that project. It was underpinned by an idea of collective action within the drama that fueled the learning, and that drove it in a playful way. This idea of diverse literacies, you know, in kind of you know, that they were drawing from lots of different ways to express themselves. And this idea of the girls rejecting stereotypes on their own terms. So they created this liminal female male characters, which actually really challenged the teacher's perceptions of them as not being willing to come forward. It was almost seemed to counter that. So this idea of willfulness as a feminist ethics really emerged here for us. And the idea, again, from Sarah Ahmed, that we recognize each other, we can find each other, and we can create spaces of relief, spaces that might be breathing spaces, spaces that can be inventive, that these were really key in the girls enacting this sense of their own reality. And again, a couple of other quotes. I was surprised she wasn't scared, like she was brave as well at home, and it really relates to how we are in our language and stuff. So it was really nice that we all could relate to it as well. And as a group, we took our own evaluation of the effectiveness of the project from the girls. And again, the words were really important. So again, you have so many quotes from the girls around this, that we kind of really felt that, you know, we really felt that it was important, you know, kind of important to share those as an ethics of belonging. So finally then, and then we'll have 10 minutes just for reflections. What we're proposing actually is that story making can challenge the idea of belonging. And this perhaps is very different to types of belonging that we might think of, or types of citizenship that we might think of in some areas of the curriculum, because the girls were actively involved in this, and they were able to shape through story worlds the spaces that they wanted to reflect and explore. So the school space and the social location, their perceptions and their liminal identities were seen to change, but it was on their own terms. Our adults, our perceptions were also challenged as well through active participation and self-reflection on our own power and positionality. And this was key, and it was all underpinned by careful listening to the girls. And there's this indication that thinking imaginatively, feeling free, and being part of something are effective responses to process story making. And it's a space of possibility. And again, one of the girls talked again and again about this idea about there being no judgment in those spaces. In Story Makers, you can do whatever you want. It's a story you can make. You can think of an idea and you can just say it out loud. It doesn't matter if it's not a good idea. In class, you have to stick to the same theme, but in Story Makers, we do whatever idea we like. So I think this idea of expressing your feelings really came through. So, as a pedagogy of belonging, propose that storying and the act of making meaning through stories is a pedagogy of belonging. It could be a critical form of literacy. Drama and the unique way that it works that enables learning holistically was key to that, and these emotional expressions. The imagination was key as a tool for empowerment. And again, this idea of safe spaces is something that comes out again, and whether our space is really safe and what kind of work do we need to do around that. So I'm finally going to end by coming back to this idea of culturally responsive teaching, and some other definitions of that, and perhaps for us to reflect in the last 5 minutes or so on where they feature in this pedagogy. These are by Kozlowski. Talks about actively engaging your students in learning, communicating high expectations, an appreciation of diversity, learning about the experience of diverse groups, exploring personal family histories, and it goes on. Sharing control of the classroom with your students, and anchoring your curriculum in the everyday lives of your students. I'm aware that we didn't do all of those, but I think they're a useful starting point. For us, the idea of the work really centered on using a holistic approach, listening to understand, being aware of our own intersectional identities as artists, and being aware of how to make space. And I'm just going to end there. And there are the girls, very proud of their book. And I should also mention that we have an explorer's guide. So the books are available to buy. That's not a sale, by the way, but of course what we're trying to do is bring the practice into classrooms. And then we create a story maker's guide, which takes 6 components of the story through pictures and gives step-by-step kind of guide to using drama to explore aspects of the story, using thought journals. So it's trying to bring that pedagogy of belonging into school space, and of course for teachers to taking it up using their own professional imagination. It also links to the PHSE and the relationship curriculum at the back of, and the social emotional the SMSC curriculum framework at the back of the guide, and it also has a framework to think about imagination, well-being, and aspects of community and active listening. So I am going to just stop there and invite conversation and responses for the last part of the session.